Welcome to Sturminster Newton, a small market town in the Blackmore Vale area of North Dorset. There's a lot of history here, and the town centre is built in a mixture of styles including 17th and 18th century thatched cottages, Georgian stone buildings and 19th century brick buildings. The town has an interesting literary history too, and has for the best part of 200 years punched well above its weight in literary terms. Thomas Hardy, one of the greatest figures in English literature, lived here for a time, as did two Dorset dialect poets, William Barnes and Robert Young. Like many other towns, Sturminster Newton has expanded over the years, but if these authors walked here today, there is much that would still be familiar to them. Let's look at some of the familiar landmarks. Sturminster Magistrates Court used to be at the back of the Swan in a long room over the stables. Holbrook's building used to be the Crown Inn, and in his diaries Hardy records attending concerts in the assembly rooms above the inn here. Sturminster was Hardy's Stour Castle in Tess of the D'Urbervilles, and in the novel he imagines Tess and her younger brother making their way from Marnell, or Marlott in the story, through Sturminster town centre in the middle of the night as they head to Dorchester, Hardy's Casterbridge, on a rickety wagon loaded with beehives. Hardy describes the little town as looking dumbly somnolent under its thick brown thatch. After finishing work earlier that evening, Tess had danced with the young man called Angel Clare in her home village of Marnell. Clare had then walked on to Sturminster with his brothers and was asleep in one of the inns as Tess rode through the town, which may well have been imagined by Hardy as the White Hart. Thomas Hardy and his first wife Emma moved to Sturminster in 1876, and Hardy wrote his highly acclaimed novel The Return of the Native while he lived here. Hardy later described the 2 years that they spent at the riverside as our happiest time. The privately owned house overlooks the Stour and had even better views of the river in Hardy's day, when there were fewer trees and shrubs on the bank. Hardy's diaries recall how they went rowing on the river, finding the weeds so thick that it was difficult to move the boat. Among the poems Hardy wrote about his time in Sturminster are Overlooking the River Stour and A 2 Years' Idyll. Down by the River Stour, the watermill and the nearby six-span stone bridge are special landmarks of the town and would appear remarkably unchanged to Hardy, Barnes and Young. William Barnes would have crossed the river on his way to school each day and mentions it in a number of poems, including one about the mill called Pentridge by the Stour. Be there any leaves to quiver on the aspen by the river? Do we shade the water still where the rushes be a-growing, where the sullen stours are flowing, drew the meads from mill to mill? Or if a tree were dear to me, oh, 'twere thick aspen by the river. Hardy also wrote about the mill in his poem The Second Visit, after returning to the town later in his life. Clack, clack, clack went the mill wheel as I came, and she was on the bridge with the thin hand rail, and the miller at the door, and the ducks at mill rail. This attractive white iron bridge, dating from 1841, is called Culber Bridge, and is just a short walk upstream from Hardy's riverside home, so it's not surprising to find it as the subject of one of his poems, On Sturminster Footbridge. Reticulations creep upon the slack stream's face when the wind skims irritably past. The current clucks smartly into each hollow place that years of flood have scrabbled in the pier's sodden base. The old tailor's cottage was where Robert Young's father had his first tailor's business. After Young took over his father's shop, he became a successful businessman and invested in property in the town. One of the properties his family owned were the riverside villas, the northern one of which was rented by Thomas Hardy and then lived in by Robert Young himself towards the end of his life. Although he was a master tailor, Young is best remembered for his humorous verse in the Dorset dialect. Using the pseudonym Rabbin Hill and describing himself as an old Dorset songster, Young published some of his writing, and other poems were printed in various publications during his lifetime. After his death, a collection of his poems was edited by the Reverend J.C.M. Mansell Pledel. The opening of the railway lines in Dorset clearly made an impression, as both William Barnes and Robert Young wrote light-hearted poems about the excitement of people taking trips by train. Barnes's poem John Bloom in London was about a Fontwell Magnum miller taking a train journey to see the great exhibition in the capital. Then up the guard did whistle shill, and then the engine panked a blast, and rottled on, so loud's a mill, before the train from slow to fast. And oh, at last, how they did spank by cutting deep and high cast bank, and while their iron hoss did pank. In Rabbin Hill's visit to the railway, what he zeed and done, and what he said about it, Young imagined Rabbin taking his first ride on a steam train. The engine gied another shriek, and Rabbin Hill looked rather whitish. "Bother thick screeching things," said he. "Thick nays to always make eyes spitish." This was the dame's school which William Barnes attended as a young boy, and was largely self-educated, making his later literary achievements all the more remarkable. He went on to become both a schoolmaster and a clergyman after moving away from Sturminster, but it is as a Dorset dialect poet that he is best remembered. He always retained a special affection for the town, though, as shown in his poem, Our Early Landscape. Styles old and Minster town, our own dear birthstead glides he slowly through, beneath its hoary bridge of stone, on both sides old, on one called new. The parish church of St Mary was where William Barnes was baptised and where he worshipped. The carved oak lectern was purchased by public subscription and placed in the church as a memorial to Barnes after his death. Robert Young was also a parishioner, and after his death the Reverend Mansell Pledel edited his poems to form the volume Poems in the Dorset Dialect. William Barnes recounted how he used to sit here and watch the comings and goings in the town. Robert Young remembered seeing an errant husband flogged. The town's museum is housed in this lovely historic building which dates back to the 16th century. During the years, this attractive thatched building has been a shop, solicitors' offices and the town council office. Information about Hardy, Barnes and Young and their associations with the town form part of the literary heritage displays, and you can pick up a copy of the Literary Trail leaflet which will take you on a tour of locations which were so familiar to them.